Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. In this podcast, we talk about books, interview authors, and we discuss their journey to becoming published. Each one has a different but amazing story. My hope is to encourage people to keep reading good books and to help authors find their audience and inspire everyone in their journey, whatever that might be. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. Welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and I'm back from a little bit of a hiatus. The month of January, we had about 3 snowstorms all in 1 week. And I love winter, but that was about enough for me. So I'm happy to be turning my attention towards spring now as we begin this month of February. It's a beautiful 52 degrees outside and sunny, which for Iowa counts as a warm spring day. But my guest today is an author named Margarita Barresi, and she's just written a book called A Delicate Marriage, and it's her first novel. She was raised in Puerto Rico by her grandparents, and she grew up hearing stories about the good old days, and that has all conspired to come together in the story that she's written. A really charming, at least from what I've read so far, it's just really delightful story about Puerto Rico in the 1930s, early 40s, and some of the history there, and the exploration of marriage set in the background of this political turmoil. There's a lot happening in this story, and I'm excited to talk to you today, Margarita. So welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey.
Thank you so much, Art. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, I was hoping you could send some warm Puerto Rican weather my way, but I don't know.
If only,
Yeah.
if only. I'm going in April, and it's almost a waste to go in April. You know, you kind of
Sure.
need to go when it's much colder here.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, and I believe you said right now you're based in Boston,
Yes.
which is a little bit different weather-wise, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I came to the Boston area to attend college. I went to Boston University, and as happens, I never went back. Fell in love, married an American man, and raised a family here. So,
Yeah. Now we'll talk all about your story here in a minute and your
mhm,
writing journey. I love filling out my TBR list with book recommendations from our guests. So
mhm.
what kind of books have you been reading lately, and what are some of your favorites that you could recommend?
Well, it's funny because I'm the kind of reader I'll save a book that I know is going to be really good. Like, no, I don't want to read it yet. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait. And what happened, I found myself at the end of 2023 with about 8 or 10 of these books that I had quote unquote saved. And so I said, well, I better read them.
Hmm.
So the first book I read in 2023 was Covenant of Water. And it's a 700-page tome
Wow.
that I did not want to end. It
Wow.
is that beautifully written. It is just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. So I highly recommend that. It's by Ibrahim Verghese, and he also wrote a novel before that called Cutting for Stone, if you haven't
Hmm.
read that one. And they're both set in Southeast Asia, so Southeast India. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm a little hesitant to start the big thick books, although
Hmm.
I do love like Charles Dickens and some of the old classics like
Hmm.
that. But I love it when a book just absorbs you and you don't want it to end.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a writing feat for a reader to not want a 700-page book to end.
Hmm.
I could have kept reading about all of these people. The characters are fantastic. So I highly recommend that one.
What's it about?
It's about several doctors practicing medicine in this very remote area at the
Mm-hmm.
time of India, um, in the first half of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the all of the interactions with their patients and how their patients are related to each other. And it's just a beautiful stew of characters and events.
Yeah. Oh, so is it kind of one of those that tells little different storylines that kind of interweave with each other kind
Yes,
of thing? Okay.
exactly that. Yeah.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, always trying to add some diversity to my reading, and
Hmm.
I saw something you had written online that you recommended some Latinx authors. Could
Hmm.
you go ahead and
Hmm.
share some of those, some of your favorites?
Sure. Well, let me just say that Latin women right now are having a moment in the literary arts.
Hmm.
There is so much good reading right now by Latin women. And there are the the stars that probably most people have heard of, like Isabel Allende and Sandra Cisneros and Julia Alvarez
Hmm.
and Esmeralda Santiago, who is also Puerto Rican. But there are also some really great up and comers. And I recommend Elizabeth Acevedo. She
Hmm.
has a book called Family Lore. I think it came out in the fall. And she's Dominican, and this story is fabulous. It's about four sisters and how they interact in the Dominican culture, and it's really great. She has written YA books before, so this is her first adult novel. And then I have another recommendation. The author is Melissa Lozada-Olivia, and she wrote a book called Candelaria. And I read that book right around Halloween.
Hmm.
And Candelaria is this crazy zombie apocalypse, um, Hispanic culture, weird lady with a hair, a funky haircut that appears in all kinds of different crazy places.
Mm.
It is just a romp to read. I loved it. It's a
Mm.
lot of fun.
Well, you had me at zombie apocalypse, so
Right?
I
I
mean, yeah.
know. I know. And I'll mention one other.
Uh-huh.
Elisabet Velasquez is her name, and she wrote a book called When We Make It. She's a what we call a New Yorican, a Puerto Rican who grew up in New York.
Mm.
Um, and her book, it's actually a YA, but it's a novel in verse. And I don't care if it's supposed to be YA. It everybody can
Mm.
read this book and just it's beautiful. You can tell a poet wrote it. Um, and it just really brings to life the experience of, a population that lives between cultures.
I had read a book a year or two ago called "It Rained Warm Bread," and it was about it tells the story of a survivor's one of the survivors of the Jewish Holocaust. But it
Mm.
was written by a poet named Hope Anita Smith. It was all done in like poetry form, and I've
Mm.
never read anything like that before. It was so beautiful about such a heartbreaking situation, and that was classified as young adult. But I'm like, well, maybe this is why I can finally understand a poem here. It's written for a younger audience, but it was just so well done.
It sounds a lot like When We Make It. Yeah.
These all sound like a good additions here to our to my TBR list, and
Mhm.
should keep me busy reading here.
I'm sure you will. Actually, I had mentioned Elizabeth Acevedo,
Hmm.
who wrote that A Family Lore, and that's her first adult novel, as I said. But she wrote a YA book in verse called Poet X. That's excellent as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're really looking to, I guess YA is the big verse, novel and verse
Hmm.
genre or
Yeah,
something. So if you're looking for other suggestions, that's another great one.
like I said, it was an unusual for me, but I'm like, it just blew me away. It was one of the best books I've read. Really, I don't know. It's just it's a horrible point in history, but it was written with such beauty.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out.
Now, are you a big reader yourself, or Is it off and on?
No, my God. If I don't have a book going, I feel untethered. I mean, I always have at least one book going,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes more if I'm reading for my research. But yeah, since childhood, from Dr. Seuss to Nancy Drew to the childhood classics and
Mm-hmm.
beyond, I've just always loved immersing myself in a story. There's nothing like it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once I learned to read, there was really no going back, you know.
right? I know.
Yeah, yeah, and I've mentioned before, but I gotta especially thank my grandma for supplying me with books and Hardy Boys and raiding garage sales for me, and between her and our local library, I had a good education.
I love it. Grandmas are the best.
Absolutely. But now, as a reader, transferring to a writer now, let's
Mhm.
talk about your writing journey. Now, as I mentioned, you had grown up in Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
and your book is set there, and it sounds like a lot of from your history is tied into that story. You want to just kind of tell us how did you end up in Puerto Rico, and how has that influenced your writing?
Well, I was born in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so I'm Puerto Rican, and my grandparents raised me. They were from a different time in on the island when uh, life was a little more genteel, and they had all these beautiful stories about the balls that they would attend and all of these things. Although my grandfather grew up very poor, so he only had that life later. And my grandmother was a debutante.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sounded like it's so much fun and it sounded so glamorous. And I always wanted to write about it. So when I did finally sit down to write about it, I went into um, big research mode. It's my book is historical fiction, so it needs to be accurate. And what I found was that this time was uh, very turbulent and a time of big change on the island, much more so than I ever imagined, or much more so than I had been taught in school. And that a lot of the things that the men and women um, did during that time and were so proud of doing ended up having pretty terrible repercussions down the line,
Mm-hmm.
now that that generation is dead. So for me, that felt like a story that needed to be told. So we have two characters, one who's very, very poor and one who's a debutante, and they mirror exactly the how society was at the time on the island. You either had a lot of money or you were very, very poor. You lived in the mountains, you were illiterate, or you lived in a slum with subhuman conditions, just horrible conditions. And the fact that those two existed at the same time was really interesting to me and also very horrifying. Why didn't these people do more to help the
Mm-hmm.
people, the slum dwellers and such? But so that's the story. And well, that's the basis for the story. And as it turns out, one of my characters is very much about moving forward and bringing the island into modernity, working with the United States. And the other character is much more interested in bringing the island into modernity, independent of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates a lot of conflict in their marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of like their marriage is parallel there you go to kind of the I guess the relationship with the United States and Puerto
Mhm.
Rico, kind of
Right.
that same following that a similar path. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a delicate marriage between the US and Puerto Rico, and it's a delicate marriage between my characters.
right, right, and there are I'm finding out the older I get that there are some profound gaps in my knowledge that whether I didn't get taught at schools or I'm being taught from only one perspective. And
Hmm.
and that's where I really appreciate books like yours, that here's what the history books tell you, but here's what the people who actually lived through it experienced. And
Right.
I think we can gain so much empathy from that, and some real understanding of the situations that often are very complicated, but it's good to hear from their voices.
Agreed. And I love reading about other cultures and other um, historical eras as well. Historical
Mm,
fiction is my favorite genre to read.
mm,
So, that's why I ended up writing a historical fiction novel, I guess.
hmm.
But I got an education writing this book because in Puerto Rico, in high school, you have to take Puerto Rican history and Puerto Rican to like graduate, right?
Hmm.
It's a requirement. It's all of one semester. It's not even a full year. Most people take it senior year when you don't really care about anything.
Right.
So I was not paying attention. And even if I had been, what we were taught was just so superficial and so much of it through an American lens that
Hmm.
now going back and really, going to the sources and reading speeches and reading newspaper articles and so forth, and you really understand what was happening back then. It's a whole different story.
Hmm.
So I say I'm a born again Boricua because I rediscovered my roots.
I have often felt like I wish I could go back and retake some of the classes I had in high school or something, just because I know more now, and I wasn't paying attention back then. Like like you're
Yeah,
saying,
I know.
yeah,
I know.
yeah. Well, the same is true for like some of the classics they make you read in high school, and your brain just hasn't developed enough to really
Hmm.
appreciate it, And
Absolutely.
it's been fun revisiting those now. And why did they ever give this book to a teenager?
Yeah, it's funny because you read it from a completely different perspective.
Yeah. Now, your two main characters, Marco and Isabel, they are inspired by your grandparents. Is that
Hmm.
right? What can you tell me about them?
Well, as I mentioned, my grandmother was a debutante.
Hmm.
So Isabella is a debutante. And my grandfather grew up in a town outside of San Juan, pretty rural. He didn't, have a running water or anything. And he was pretty much a self-made man. So he actually attended the University of Puerto Rico. He went to San Juan and attended the University of Puerto Rico at night. So it
Hmm.
took him a long time to get a degree, and he got a degree in accounting, like Marco, the character.
Hmm.
But when my grandparents met, my great grandfather, so my grandmother's father, really did not like my grandfather because he was some poor schmo from the hills, and he
Right.
didn't think that, he was good enough for my grandmother. So he did everything in his power to break them up and keep them apart. And a lot of his little tactics are in the book,
Mm.
which you've probably read, right? Don Gabriel is a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
He does not like Marco, and he is just set to try and break him up. And all of that really happened. And my grandmother did want to be an actress and did get invited to go to Mexico
Hmm.
to be in films, but he wouldn't let her because it wasn't a respectable career.
Mm-hmm. Imagine that. Yeah.
So the book is really my grandparents' story until they get
Hmm.
married.
Hmm.
And then after that, they didn't have different political viewpoints or anything like that. They didn't have that kind of, saucy marriage. So the rest of it is really, really fiction.
Sure. Yeah. But you kind of incorporate some some of your background, some of their background, and you're
Hmm.
able to then craft a story that gets the message out. Yeah. So what led you to want to write this story? When did you say, you know what, I need to tell this story. I need to get it out.
I've always wanted to write a book, and I didn't know it was this book,
Hmm.
but when I went to college, I was too chicken to really major in, English and try and be a writer. I didn't, I wasn't into the starting artist life.
Yeah.
So I used my writing talent to major in journalism and public relations. And so I had a career where I wrote all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a family. And when the heck am I going to have the bandwidth to, write for myself?
Mm-hmm.
Never, never during that time. But once my children got older and I became an empty nester, I started exploring some creative nonfiction writing, some essays about growing up in Puerto Rico. And I really gravitated to um, telling stories about Puerto Rico,
Mm.
and people really seemed to enjoy them. So I thought, I'm going to tell the story of my grandparents. And that's what happened.
Yeah. now, now, do you like to outline and stick to an outline, or do you just do it by the seat of your pants?
I kind of did a mix. I
Okay.
would outline 3 or 4 chapters ahead and
Mm-hmm.
then write those and then figure out, well, what's going to happen now. I knew what I wanted the beginning to be and I knew how I wanted to end, but I
Mm.
wasn't sure what the middle, what the rest of it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Baby outline by baby outline, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's. I had also saw a couple of references on your information you sent about the cover art, and so
Mhm.
now you have me intrigued because it is a beautiful cover, just gorgeous illustration. So, what's the story behind the cover art?
Thank you. I'm so happy you like it because I love the cover and I
Yeah.
have gotten so many compliments on it. And for the listeners, it is a woman from behind, and she is looking out into a landscape of ocean and mountains and a little bit of colonial architecture. And it's really, really colorful and lots of blues and greens. And when I was working with my publisher and the art director there to come up with a cover, I really wanted it to be reminiscent of Puerto Rican poster tradition. And this is something that was born in the 1940s
Mm.
when the government had a lot of public health campaigns and kind of just public education campaigns about you have a right to vote, for example, that were targeted to the rural areas in Puerto Rico. And most of those people were illiterate.
Mm.
So they came up with these posters that were all illustrated, initially just 1 or 2 colors because there wasn't a lot of budget for that, but they were silk screened and they were just really kind of beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very effective as communications pieces. And eventually that turned into, well, let's do graphic posters to promote the arts, and let's do graphic posters around Christmas, and oh, we want to protest something, let's do a poster for that. So it became really part of the visual lexicon of Puerto
Mm-hmm.
Rico. And they all have a very specific look. Kind of, they're nowadays super colorful, a little bit cubist looking, always illustrated, really great use of typography. And they're collector's items now. And I actually have some.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was the inspiration behind the cover. I wanted it to look like a Puerto Rican poster.
I mean, I find it just a very striking, in its color and all that. But then somebody from Puerto Rico would see that and be like, oh, I get it. I see what you're trying
Mhm.
to do there. Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah. Now you said, you're going to be hopefully going back there this
Hmm.
spring. Do you make a lot of trips back and forth?
I try to go once a year. It doesn't always work that way,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with COVID and everything. If I don't go, I have to go to replenish my soul. If I don't go, I feel it. I
Mm-hmm.
just really need to connect with the ground there and the ocean and the mountains. And so, yeah, I'm going with my husband in April, and we're going to stay in the mountains this time.
All right. Yeah. I get it. There's just some places that it seems like it just rejuvenates you, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What message do you hope this book will send out to people who might read it? What lessons do you want them to learn from it?
Hmm. Well, at its core, it's a love story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of the message there is the resilience of love and how it can survive and overcome hardship. So that I think is an important lesson for people to remember.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for Americans who read it, I'd really like them to come away with a better understanding of our history and culture and our relationship with the United States, that we are part of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And for Puerto Ricans who read it, I hope to give them a little sense of nostalgia, a little visit back to their roots. And I do get a lot of comments from Puerto Ricans who read it that, oh my God, I felt like I just went on a little visit and the food and this and that, the music, everything. So
Mm.
I guess I have messages for different people.
Yeah. Well, I can definitely catch that. It's one of the things when I first heard about your book that I immediately was interested in was just that storyline of the strength of love and how it
Mm,
can endure, and even through that those hardships, it can strengthen uh, things like that. And it just feels like there's too many things these days that are being torn apart.
true.
And I love a story that will want to promote that staying together, I guess.
Yeah,
But
well,
yeah,
sometimes you have to work at it,
right, right,
but, and sometimes it doesn't work out, but
right.
at least try.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you have plans to write more in the
I
future?
do, I
All
do.
right.
My next novel is going to be about the birth control. The birth control pill trials were held in Puerto Rico
Mm,
in the late 1950s on lower income women who lived in public housing, and they weren't told that they
mm.
were participating in a drug trial. So
Yikes.
I'm going to write a story around that, and from the perspective of the doctors and from the perspective of the participants. And I've done all of the research. So now I just have to sit down and actually get the words down.
That could potentially be a very difficult story to write. It sounds like.
It could be, but I think, well, it is.
Well,
And
emotionally, yeah.
yeah, and it actually ended up having the FDA change the way it required doctors and companies to inform
Mm,
patients participating in trials, um, because these women weren't told, and there
mm,
were some deaths.
mm-hmm.
So there was something good that came out of it
Right.
eventually.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. That. Well, I anticipating reading that when it comes out. That it sounds like it'll be a very powerful story. Boy, that reminded me of. I don't think I read this. I haven't read it, but my wife read. Is it called Radium Girls? I think
Yes, I've
is.
read that.
Okay, yeah. Is that what I was thinking of, where they were using like radioactive material and didn't realize it, or they didn't realize the.
Yeah, they were painting the numbers on clock dials
Mm,
with some sort of radioactive material that made it glow in the dark, and
mm-hmm.
they would lick the brush as they were doing it. And yeah, horrible.
Yeah, absolutely horrible. Yeah, I remember her telling me that story, and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Just awful. Well, that's kind of a depressing note to wrap up that conversation with, but um, it's important, to tell these stories. As is commonly said, if you don't know history, we're doomed to repeat it.
True.
And I think there's a lot of valuable lessons we can learn from there. And when we see positive change come out of hardship, I think that's so good.
Absolutely.
And then, what kind of writing advice can you give to those who might be wanting to tell their own story?
Well, I'll give writing advice to someone who wants to write creatively.
Mm-hmm.
And this is advice that I ignored
Mm.
at my peril because it cost me a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the advice is to just get a first draft out on paper. It doesn't matter how messy it is, it doesn't matter if it has holes or whatever, just get something on paper. And then you can go back and fix the language and make it beautiful. I spent so much time perfecting every word and every sentence as I was doing my first draft for things that ended up in the cutting room floor because
Mm-hmm.
they just didn't make sense in the story after I had gone a little further for whatever reason. So I am definitely writing a messy first draft this time around and then going back and editing. They say, write drunk and edit sober, right? That's what I'm going to do.
I love it.
And I suggest everybody heed that advice and don't be stupid like me and not take it to heart.
Right. That's great. Right, drunk. Oh, and I know I've had plenty of previous guests talk about the importance of editing and having an editor to
Hmm.
help you in that
Yeah.
process. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But yeah, just I think we can be our own worst enemy at times to think, oh,
Hmm.
I don't want to. If it's not perfect, I don't want to do it, or I'm not ready yet, or the time's not right. We'll come up with some kind of an excuse, uh, and then it never gets done.
And particularly first time writers, because writers as a group are super insecure,
Mm,
about you putting your baby out there, it is a very personal thing, writing something for someone else to read. So when you're starting out, you want it to be as perfect as possible,
right.
but then you're just going to get stuck. So be
Yeah.
messy.
One of my favorite writers is Louise Penny. She writes mysteries,
Hmm.
and I remember her story. She said for her first novel, it took like 10, 15 years. She was working on it, something like crazy long time. Got it published and everything, and then they asked her, "Okay, where's your second one?" She's like, "Wait, like, another one?" I spent forever working on that one, but
Yeah.
she had to learn to, okay, I can do this. I don't need to take as long, and we can learn some lessons here. So
Hopefully, I've learned some lessons too.
yeah, yeah. But I love that story. It's just, even someone who writes as well as she does can be
Mhm.
insecure and like, oh, I didn't even think about thinking ahead.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're planning to write more. I hope, your words encourage others to write and tell their story. Was it a challenge to try to incorporate real life situations into your story, or did that kind of flow easily for you?
It was a challenge creating characters based on real life. And what I ended up doing was making them physically very different from, the real people that they were based on.
Hmm.
But the rest of it was like the situations that they got in that were based on real life were pretty easy to write.
I like near the beginning when Marco and Isabel first meet, and she sees him and thinks that he looked like some famous dancer. I think it was that.
A famous tango singer.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know, something about that just was really sweet in a way. Like,
Well, as an aside, the famous tango singer's name is Carlos Gardel, and he had visited Puerto Rico, and my grandmother had the lovely job of squiring him around because they
Mm.
used my great grandfather's car.
Hmm.
So I really, to this day, believe that that was probably the highlight of my grandmother's life. She talked about that a lot. So I wanted to throw him in there as a
Yeah.
as an homage to her.
You have to do that. Yeah. But yeah. So again, your book is called A Delicate Marriage. It's well worth picking up to read. I like many of like you have shared. I feel like I was transported to Puerto Rico, and I could feel the warm sun. Maybe I'm just longing for summer. I don't know. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Art. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Yeah. Now, do you have a website we can direct people to, or a newsletter to sign up for?
I do. It's my website is margaritabarresi.com. It's margarita like the drink, Barresi.com. And if you go on there, you can sign up for my newsletter.
Okay. Yeah, and then you'll be able to keep track when new books come out and all that good
Hmm.
stuff that you're up to. So, all right. Well, I'll have those things linked in our show notes for people if you'd like to go and check out our website and find where she can get her book. It's available everywhere, from what I've seen, at least
Hmm.
on online. So, well worth picking up. I was kind of hooked right from the opening paragraphs. It starts off with a hurricane, and I'm a sucker for storms. So I like, oh, this is we're in for a ride. So all right. Well, thank you again, Margarita, for coming on, and all the best of luck to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you for listening to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. You can check out the show notes to find out all the information, links, and books that we referenced in today's episode. If you'd like to help support the show, I'd love for you to share on your social medias, tell your bookworm friends, and help us get the word out. If you'd like to help out in a financial way, there are links in the show notes where you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. You can find all episodes at bookshelfodyssey.com. And please follow us on my social medias. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Follow us there for more bookish content. And so until next time, happy reading, everyone, and take care.